Would you join me in prayer? God, we need you. Man, we need your presence. Don't send us from here without your presence, Lord. Lord, would you just fall on this place? We know that we don't have to beg you, we don't have to convince you, but you do tell us to ask you. So we're asking, Lord. Fill us with your presence, fill us with your spirit as we receive your word. Amen. Hebrews 11. I'm a little ringy. We good? All right. Hebrews 11, 24 to 28. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasure of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. Never has the story of Moses been more alive to me than it has in the last 2 months. Over my life, I've read commentaries, I've read books, I've watched the movies, and I've read the narratives. The account of Moses has always been a favorite story in the Bible for me, but it's never been as high definition sharp as it has been for me in the last couple months. Though there was a moment in my life when it was close, and that was right at my conversion. So I became a Christian in my junior year of high school. And I remember at the time, my life boiled down to probably 3 primary desires. It was social position. It was having enough money that I could get myself what I wanted from McDonald's. And it was pleasures. It was attention from girls. Those were kind of the 3 things that drove me as a junior in high school. And I read this story of Moses in the book by J.C. Ryle called Holiness. And it described the faith and the holiness of Moses. And I realized that he actually had the position, the treasure, and the pleasures at his disposal, almost in an unlimited supply, and he turned them down. Moses was a hero to me. He was willing to give up everything that I desperately wanted in order to follow God. And as I read this story of Moses, my desire for those things started to diminish in comparison to being heroic like Moses. And this story had a big impact on my early Christian years. Well, I repicked up the book in the last couple of months because I am preaching on Moses today, and I found that same Puritan evangelical fire that inspired me 25 years ago still inspires me now. I was moved to tears as I reread the same words 25 years apart. But there's something different now as I'm reading it as a 41-year-old man as opposed to a 15-year-old young man. I'm actually now the same age that Moses was when he walked away from Egypt. So what's different? 15-year-old me wanted to be heroic, a leader, an evangelist, even a martyr, maybe not to death, but at least to pain. 41-year-old me wants to be a friend of God. I want to talk with the Lord, who wants to spend time with me. I'm willing to follow him to death, but I want to know him with my whole heart. And I've seen as clearly now as I've ever seen that this story isn't actually about a heroic man. It's not about what Moses achieved for God. It's about a God who is deeply relational, a God that wants to be our friend, even. And being God's friend is no light thing. It's a call to faith and death and joy and love and a battle and victories and miracles. It might even look a lot like heroism, But after 25 years of being a Christian, I'm totally convinced that the power is not in burgeoning testosterone and optimism of a teenager. It's in deep friendship with God. And His presence and His friendship are better than anything in the world. We're going to look at what Moses' life actually would have felt like in the first 40 years of his life, leading up to these moments of faith. It says, by faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Whenever we read biblical accounts of people, it's so easy to just read with the punchline in mind. We know the end. We know that God rescues them. We know that they end up walking through the Red Sea and into the wilderness and into the Promised Land. We know the punchline. But you have to imagine Moses as a man. Can you imagine him for a moment as a person? He grew up for 40 years in the household of Pharaoh, the adopted son of the daughter of Pharaoh, living in extraordinary palaces with gardens and pools, large columned courtyards with palm trees and lotus flowers, sights and scents that delighted the senses. Growing up with the most rigorous education from the brightest minds in Egypt, he would have been trained in the military strategies from the brightest military minds. Anything worth knowing in Egypt, he was taught. He was also taught by their pagan priests all the religious texts. In Acts 7:22, it says, Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and deeds. He would have enjoyed the delicacies of the royal table, the extravagant lifestyle of limitless resources and enjoyments, servants doing his biddings, great musicians playing at banquets with the social and political elites. Moses lacked for nothing. Everything he had, everyone he knew, all the possibility of advancement and a future was tied up in Egypt. Yet his environment was also marked by the pleasures of sin, ritualistic paganism, and sexuality. A genocidal murderer for an adopted grandfather, his grandfather who would have claimed deity, people worshipped the Pharaoh. He was daily witness to the forced labor that provided everything that he enjoyed on the backs of his own people. This was nagging in the back of his mind, probably as his mother raised him, if you know the story. His mother put him in that basket, and then the daughter of Pharaoh actually brought back his mother to raise him. So he would have had some familiarity with his heritage. The Bible doesn't go into detail about how Moses came to choose association with the Hebrews rather than his adopted royal family, but it says he did that by faith. And we get this little glimpse. It says in Exodus 2:11 that he went out to his people and looked on their burdens. He knew that amid all these pleasures and status and his future, Egypt was not God's people, and it wasn't his people. And in a moment, he chose who his people were. It says, one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Hebrews 11 boils this down by describing this choice as opting for the reproach of Christ rather than the treasures of Egypt. Reproach rather than treasure. Reproach isn't a common word in our lexicon, so think he got served, or dang, he got roasted, or he was taking heat, or as my middle schoolers would say, shame. Have you ever watched a comedy roast? I tend to avoid them because they get pretty crass pretty fast, but these people look terribly uncomfortable with the choices that they made of getting them there. And there's actually, I don't know if you've seen this, there's a fad on social media where people will post their picture into a chat GPT or one of the AI bots, asking them to be roasted, saying, be brutally honest, and the chat bot will respond. I tried it, and I can see the merits. So I put this picture in. Do you actually want to know what chat said? Okay, so it says, first off, this photo looks like the cover of a podcast nobody asked for, called Middle-Aged Man Explains the Outdoors. The mountain behind you is one of the most iconic views in America, and somehow the main focus of this image is still your left nostril and a hat that says, I once bought a Yeti cooler. Half Dome is back there doing 4,800 feet of majestic granite drama, and you're in the foreground looking like the guy who just told his family, we're almost there for the last 4 miles of the hike. In the pose, it looks like you didn't take a selfie so much as accidentally activated the camera while checking for cell service. Somehow you made Yosemite look like a rest stop. It's pretty good. That was pretty good. I get why people would do it. Moses opted in for one of the worst roasts of all time. An entire government and people group roasting him, trying to kill him as well. His adopted family became his enemy. His friends disassociated with him, and this was no joke. He lost his job, he lost his home, he became a social pariah. He was excommunicated from his Egyptian people. The day he left his palace to go associate with the Hebrew people, he made the life-changing decision to accept reproach instead of treasure. He chose mistreatment instead of wealth. He chose reproach, but not reproach for reproach's sake, but to be associated with Christ. While the reproach of Moses was serious, this was not actually what he was commended for. He's commended for considering the reproach of Christ as greater wealth. This is the only thing that makes sense of what Moses was willing to give up. It was a faith that looked forward dimly to Christ and his reproach. This is what's described through Scripture, that Jesus was a man that was familiar with sorrows and acquainted with grief. He's one that men would look away from. He was familiar with suffering. He emptied himself. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death on a cross. Now, reproach alone would seem worse on its face than treasure alone. But reproach of Christ, association with him at any cost, is better than the greatest treasure and pleasure that the world has to offer. Can you believe that? That the reproach of Christ is better than the greatest wealth of the world? What if the point of this story isn't that Moses should be revered for how much he gave up, but that it's just true on its face, definitively and infinitely, that God's reproach, following Jesus and giving everything to follow him, is infinitely better than anything this world has to offer? What if that is the point, that the exchange rate is accurate to say Jesus is better than the treasures of the world? The truth is that the reproach of Christ is definitively better than the treasures of Egypt. The currency of this world pales in comparison to the currency of heaven. King David puts it this way in Psalm 84:11, "For a day in your court is better than 1,000 elsewhere." Let's make it tangible for a second, because we're talking about large spiritual topics. But let's think of a very tangible analogy. We're familiar with the experience of paying something to get something. We do that all the time. Every time you walk into Starbucks and pay $7.50 for a venti frappuccino for that pre-diabetic experience, you're trading something for something else. You're willing to pay that amount, $7.50, for that experience. But if Starbucks all of a sudden inflated their price to $100, you wouldn't, well, maybe some of you would, but $100 for a frappuccino, people are not going to be spending that. There's an exchange of value. But imagine being impressed with somebody that then took that same $100 and bought a mansion in Monterey. You wouldn't be impressed with that person for pulling out their wallet and reaching all the way in there and pulling out a $100 bill and taking all that risk to buy a mansion. There's nothing impressive about that. There's actually no risk because the exchange of value is so dramatically different. In the case of Moses, by faith, he considered that the reproach of Christ is greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt. He was willing to pay or lose the unlimited worldly pleasures, the unlimited worldly wealth, the unlimited worldly position, even being worshiped as a god, for the reproach of Christ and looking forward to a future reward. This story helps us to understand the economics of God's kingdom. God is so much better than anything we can imagine or desire in this world. Actor and comedian Jim Carrey says of his, after he had achieved significant worldly success and renown, he says, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so that they can see that it's not the answer." Moses saw how priceless it is to know and follow God. This quote from Holiness, that book that I referenced earlier, is so powerful. It says, "Do not marvel that he refused greatness, riches, and pleasure. He looked far forward. He saw with the eye of faith kingdoms crumbling into dust, riches making to themselves wings and fleeing away, pleasures leading on to death and judgment, and Christ alone and his little flock enduring forever. Wonder not that he chose affliction, a despised people, and reproach. He beheld things below the surface. He saw with the eye of faith affliction lasting but for a moment, reproach rolled away, and ending in everlasting honor, and the despised people of God reigning as kings with Christ in glory." Now, is the point of what I'm saying that we have to give up something to earn right standing with God? Oh, no. No, we don't earn our standing with God. Jesus qualifies us to become children of God. Our adoption into God's family is free because Christ paid everything. Ephesians 2 clearly states, "For by grace you have been saved through faith." That is a period, full stop. You are saved by faith alone, through grace alone. However, the very next verse, as it continues, says it's a faith that works. If we're not submitting everything in our lives in following Jesus, we should ask whether our faith is the kind of faith that James describes as useless, that believes yet does nothing. Moses' faith caused great action. He left Egypt. He forsook treasures. He gave up pleasures and position. He refused royalty and accepted poverty and reproach. Again, from J.C. Ryle, there's a common worldly kind of Christianity in this day, which many have. A cheap Christianity, which offends nobody, which requires no sacrifice, which costs nothing, and is worth nothing. But if you really are in earnest about your soul, if your religion is something more than a mere fashionable Sunday cloak, if you're determined to live by the Bible, if you're resolved to be a New Testament Christian, then you will find that you must carry a cross. You must endure hard things. You must suffer on behalf of your soul, as Moses did, or you cannot be saved. By faith, Moses considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Maybe at this point you're saying, "Jim, I hear you, but I'm just not there. I'm not ready. Maybe I'm not strong enough. Maybe my sin has got me trapped. Maybe I'm weak. Maybe I'm just too afraid and could never do what Moses did." Well, good news, you are not alone. Moses was not ready. He felt trapped. He felt weak, and he felt like he could never do what God was asking him to do either. This series has actually been helping us to see a number of people that are quote-unquote heroes of faith. But they are flawed people, just like us. Their moments of faith, their moments of sacrifice, are Swiss cheesed with moments of real weakness. And that Moses is no different. Hebrews 11 recounts all of these moments of faith without specifically indicating all of the moments of flaws, but let's look at Moses for a second. Let's look at him for a moment in that framework. He actually had slightly more questionable faith in a few different moments in his life. We're going to look at one specific moment. It's one of the more famous ones. It's when God spoke to Moses out of the burning bush. Listen to how this great hero of faith that's in this hall of faith, let's look at how he responds to God's call. The same call maybe that you're hearing me give to you. The Lord said, listen to all the things that God says he's going to do. The Lord said, I have surely seen. I know their suffering. I have come down to deliver them and to bring them up. The cry of the people of Israel has come to me. I have seen. I will send you. Okay, there's only one statement in there that says you. Did you notice that? And Moses says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children out of Egypt? But then God says, I will be with you. The flurry of God saying, I will, continues. He says, I am who I am. I have observed you. I promise I will bring you up. I will stretch out my hand to strike Egypt. I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice. So then the Lord graciously shows him these miraculous signs of the staff turning into a snake and his hand becoming leprous and being healed. And Moses says, O Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I'm slow of speech and tongue. And God says, but I made your mouth, and I will teach you what to speak. And Moses says, O Lord, please send someone else. And God says, I will be with your mouth, and with his mouth, speaking of Aaron, and I will teach you both what to do. Moses, at 80 years old, which he was at this point, was not a towering man of faith, right? Do you feel weak in your faith? Do you feel like when we're talking about giving up treasures for the reproach of Christ, that it's hard to imagine, that your calling of God to obedience and to submission to him and giving everything you have to follow him feels hard? So did Moses. So did Moses. But listen to how Hebrews 11 recounts the story of Moses. It says, by faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who was invisible. He's commended for his faith, to associate with God's people and to accept their mistreatment onto himself. He went kicking and screaming, as we see. Was this the great faith that got him the commendation in the Hall of Faith? But Moses actually went. It wasn't a strong start, as we see. He says, please send someone else. And despite all his objections, he went. And God was able to work with that mustard seed of faith. Does it feel to you like forsaking the treasure of Egypt and accepting the reproach of Christ is a huge leap from where you stand? Do you feel like you have little faith? Maybe just a mustard seed. Well, look at how God used Moses and his faith, small though it was. And there is no mention in Hebrews of his stumbling start. No mention of how pitiful his faith was at the burning bush. Moses' record, as God tells it, was cleared on those charges. Not only cleared and forgiven, but commended for his faith. Not because of his failures, but despite them. It's almost like God forgot his sin. It's almost like God does work in covering us with his righteousness and then honors us for the the stumbling things that we do in faith in obedience to him. It's almost like our God is gracious and merciful, isn't it? Don't give up on your small faith. God can do wonders even with small faith. There's so much that we could say in the story of Moses. There's the 10 plagues that he called down. There's the coming up to the Red Sea and God parting the Red Sea for them. There's the wandering in the wilderness and the manna and the taking of the 10 commandments. There's so many stories of Moses that are worth telling and worth reading. But there's one story that I want to look at that just gives a glimpse into what it was that Moses saw, of what made it worth it, what made all of this worth it to give up the treasures of Egypt. And it's the moment after Moses had come down from the mountain with the 10 commandments and found the people of Israel had corrupted themselves. They had made a false god and had been worshiping it and defiling themselves for this idol. And God had Moses set up this tent of meeting. It was apart from the camp. It was this place of encounter with God. It was away from the corruption. It was a holy place where God spoke with Moses. And this exchange, to me, it's the moment. It's a glimpse, it's a taste of what it was that Moses saw with faith. Exodus 33, 11 through 22, it says, "The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend." And then we get this glimpse into the conversation. How does God speak with his friends? What does it look like to be a friend of God? And as I read this has been in my heart in the last, I've been reading through it in my personal devotion, and my heart is just camped here. This is what I want. I want to be the friend of God. And listen to this conversation. Moses said to the Lord, "You've been telling me, lead these people, but you've not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways, so that I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember, this nation is your people." And the Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." As God's friend, we receive both his friendship, and then he spends time with Moses. He says, "I will give you my presence. I will be with you." And there was physical reflection of that in the cloud and in the pillar of fire, that God would show himself and lead them with his presence, but he would also give Moses rest. The friends of God receive his presence and his rest. And then the rhythm of this dialogue goes on. It says, Moses said to him, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else distinguishes me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "I will do this very thing you've asked, because I am pleased with you, and I know you by name." The intimacy and the knowledge of God. He's with them. He wants to be with them. He knows them. It's not just a generic, "You are my people and I know you" generically. He knows you. Brian and Lucinda, he knows you. And Pat and Kim, he knows you. And Jim and Janet, he knows you. He knows you by name. We're not just his people. His presence goes with us. His presence is descending on us in a way that he knows you by name and he wants to spend time with you. God's pleasure and his delight in Moses is apparent. And then Moses says, "Now show me your glory." And the Lord says, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you." The glory of God most distilled in that moment was to show his goodness, not shock and awe. It was God's goodness that he wanted to show him. When Moses asked for glory, God said, I'm going to show you goodness. And the Lord said, there's a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I've passed by. The friendship, the nearness, the favor, the presence, his rest, the personal knowledge, the glory of God, the goodness of God, his protection and cover. What makes God's people distinct? What makes it clear that he's pleased with us and that we're his people? What makes the reproach of Christ worth it? It is his presence. Moses, by faith, considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to this reward. So all the amazing stories of God's provision of the law to Moses and the manna and the meat and the water and the healing and ultimately the promised land in Canaan, were any of those the point of the faith? Was that the destination? That he had faith and he was delivered out of Egypt and into the wilderness? Or that when they were hungry, that they had faith and that God brought the manna? Or that the snakes came and they were bitten by snakes and God healed them? Or that they were given victory in battle? Or that they received homes that they hadn't built in the promised land? Were any of those things the outcome that God wanted? Was that the end of the line? Moses actually had all those things in Egypt, so those couldn't have been the outcome. Moses had the wealth, he had the food, his stomach was full, he had homes. So Moses left all those things by faith to go to something else. The outcome of faith was not a fuller stomach. The outcome of their faith was not quenched thirst. It wasn't being healed. It wasn't having a home. The outcome of his faith was the presence of God. It was friendship with God. It was encounter with God. It was watching God in the moments of despair and weakness and hunger and thirst coming through and being God and being with them and carrying them and caring about them. The presence of God and his nearness is the outcome of our faith. Heaven is not about the home that we're going to have in heaven. It's about Christ. It's about being with him. Can we, like Moses, say, if your presence does not go with us, don't send me from here? That goes for our work. That goes for our families. That goes for every decision we're making through our day. If your presence doesn't go with me, don't send me. I don't want to go anywhere that your presence is not. And if your presence is sending me into the Red Sea, one step at a time, I'll follow you, because you can make a way where there is no way. While I can be tempted, like I was when I was 15, to think and be motivated by the heroics of this story and in trying to do impressive feats of obedience with faith, I understand at 41 that God is not impressed by my heroics, not even calling down 10 plagues or delivering 1 million Hebrews from slavery or parting the Red Sea or manna from heaven or receiving the 10 Commandments. In fact, the list of things that Moses is commended for his faith about don't include a single one of those heroics. God is not impressed by our heroics, nor is he limited by our mustard seed of faith. By faith, Abraham understood that the reproach of Christ was better wealth than the treasures of Egypt. What is better than anything else in the world? The story of Moses teaches us that lies in the tent of meeting. It actually, right now, as that tent used to be a place, he had to go out of the camp to encounter God. That access that we have now, the curtain temple is torn, the presence that we have access to is all the time. We have access to that presence right now. We have access to that presence on Monday when we go back to work, and Monday evening when we get home, whenever we're going through our kids' homework or doing homework or working our jobs. We have access to that presence all day. There is no moment in our time where we have to physically leave where we are to go to be with the presence of God. We get the access now and all the time to the presence of God. And are we capitalizing? Are we taking the opportunity to be in his presence? By faith, you can have a relationship with the God who made you, who loves you, who knows you by name, and has set his favor upon you. And that is greater treasure than all the treasures of Egypt. As I close, we're gonna take communion. Can I just have the band come up and join me? I didn't focus on this in the message, but it's a great parallel to communion. It actually says in that Hebrews 11 passage, by faith Moses kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. Moses actually led in the first communion without referring to that or without having full understanding of what he was doing. The blood of the Lamb was spilled for the rescue of God's people from sin and from death. The Passover meal was that lamb that was killed along with unleavened bread that was broken. The Hebrew people ate this meal dressed, with their belts tied and their shoes on, ready to follow God out of slavery. Now Jesus, in fulfillment of this first Passover, actually communion was taken at the Passover supper. At the Passover meal with his disciples, Jesus explained how that blood that they had spilled that saved them from the destroyer was his blood. He was the lamb. The unleavened bread broken was his body. And as we eat today, I want us to be ready. For centuries, the people of Israel would eat that meal with their belts tied and their shoes on, because the meal wasn't about sitting and doing nothing after being delivered. They were delivered to leave slavery. They were delivered to go into the presence of God, to go out to the wilderness, to watch what God did, to follow him on that adventure of faith. I don't want us to eat the bread and take this cup and do nothing. We, like the Hebrew people, let's be ready. What is the belt that God is telling you to tighten up and the shoes that he's telling you to put on? We receive this meal with gratefulness for the sacrifice that saves us and delivers us. But delivers us to what? To a life full of the presence of God is what he intends. A life full of encounter with the living God, watching him do amazing things.